The candles in the long room had only just been lit, and the wax still smelled green, and into that warm and ordinary brightness, a single open hand came down hard upon the wrist of the most powerful woman in the county. The crack of it carried farther than any music had that evening. A glass paused at a gentleman's lip. A fan stopped halfway through its turn. Somewhere near the doors, a footman in the Academy's plain gray livery drew a breath. He did not let out, and his voice, when it came, was not loud, but it filled the room the way cold water fills a cup. You struck a duchess. For the length of one held heartbeat, nobody moved. The woman who had spoken those 4 words stood very still in the center of all that candlelight, a young woman of plain dress and raw hands, her chest rising and falling, her own palm still tingling from the blow she had not planned and could not now take back. She did not look at the Duchess. She looked instead at the small figure crouched against the wainscot, a girl of the scullery half, folded over herself with her arm thrown up across her face, and at the slender ebony cane that hung suspended in the Duchess's other hand, raised, arrested, an inch from where it had been about to fall. The whole room went silent, and in that silence Marigold Ash understood that whatever her life had been an hour before, it was something else entirely now. Let us go back, before the cane, before the cry, to a morning some weeks earlier, when the worst thing in her world had been a warped soundboard and a quarter day's rent owed. She was 24 that spring, and she had been alone in trade for 3 years. Her father had been a maker of instruments, a patient man with spectacles pushed up into his gray hair, and she had grown up among the curled shavings of pear wood and the smell of hide glue warming on the stove. When the fever took him in the 3rd week of a hard February, it left her 2 unsold pianofortes, a chest of tuning hammers and felts, a ledger written in his small upright hand, and a name that meant a little something to the music families of Marbury and nothing at all to anyone above them. Marigold had kept the name alive by the only means she had. She tuned. She mended. She copied out fair scores for the daughters of attorneys and clergymen who could not afford an engraved edition, and she carried her father's leather roll of tools from house to house through streets that did not much notice her passing. To the town she was useful and invisible, which are 2 words that sit together more often than the comfortable like to think. The genteel households that summoned her did not offer her a chair. The Salters Academy of Music, the proud assembly rooms at the top of the High Street, where the county's young ladies were brought to be polished and displayed, used her hands a dozen times a season and never once used her name. She came in by the side passage. She knelt at the great instrument in the assembly room before the candles were lit and the guests arrived, and she was expected to be gone by the time they came. That was the order of things, and Marigold had made a kind of peace with it. She did not declare to herself that she was worth more than her station allowed. She simply did the work better than anyone else who might be called, and let the work be the argument, and asked nobody to hear it. What she did not yet know was that someone had begun to. The Salters Academy did not belong to the Salters anymore. It had passed, by a chain of deaths and settlements, into the patronage of the Dowager Duchess of Stilmere, and the Dowager Duchess held it the way she held everything, with a closed hand and an open eye. Her name was Almeria, though no one beneath a baronet would have dared to think it. And she had been beautiful once, in the cold way, that does not soften with years but only sharpens. She wore gray silk and a rope of diamonds, the color of frost, and she came to the Academy's assemblies, not to hear the music, but to weigh the girls who made it, and to decide, with the small movements of her mouth, which of them might be permitted to matter. It was the Duchess who had decided, 3 seasons running, that her late husband's distant heir, the Duke of Halverstone, should be brought to the point of marriage with Lady Petronelle Vassay. Lady Petronelle was handsome and rich and correct, and she sang in a clear, cool soprano that never once strayed from the note. And she had been told since the schoolroom that she was the right choice, and she believed it as she believed the sun rose, without ever having watched it do so. The Duke of Halverstone was not an easy man to bring to any point at all. He had come into the title 2 years before, after a season of funerals that had emptied his family of nearly everyone in it, and he had come into it grieving in a manner that the county found inconvenient, and therefore decided was pride. He was tall, and held himself very straight, with dark hair cut close, and a jaw that looked carved rather than grown, and eyes the gray of slate under rain. He spoke seldom, and when he spoke it was in short, level sentences that derived their authority from rank and from the visible effort of his restraint, rather than from any heat. He did not dance. He did not flatter. The mothers of Marbury called him cold, and the daughters found that they could not stop watching him, and both facts annoyed the Dowager Duchess equally, because neither could be turned to her use. What none of them knew was the shape of his grief. He had a sister once. Her name had been Roderica, near enough to his own that their mother had wished them matched even in that, and she had played the pianoforte with a gift that frightened the masters who'd taught her. She had also loved a man the family forbade, and she had been brought to the Salters Academy, in the years before it changed hands, to be cured of both the love and the gift by exposure to better matches. She had not been cured. She had faded instead, quietly and completely the way a candle goes out behind a door, and she had died in a cold January with a half-copied sonata still open on the music desk, and the Duke had never forgiven the rooms that had done it, nor himself for not coming sooner. He owned a great deal now. He did not own that. The Academy had slipped to Stilmere while he was still wearing black, and he had let it, because he could not bear to walk the long room where his sister's hands had moved. This was the world Marigold Ash knelt in, unseen, on the morning that everything turned. She had been sent for early, before the day's assembly, to set right the Academy's great pianoforte, which had been let go badly out of tune and worse out of regulation, and which the Duchess intended Lady Petronel to play that evening before company that included the Duke. Marigold came in by the tradesman's door, as she always did, and she found the assembly room empty and gray in the early light, the candles unlit, the chairs not yet set out, and she rolled out her tools on the floor beside the instrument and began. She loved this part of the work, the solitude of it, the slow conversation between her ear and the wires. She set her wedge and struck the unison and listened to the beats, slow and vanish, and the room filled, note by note, with a thing that had not been there before. She did not hurry. Her father had taught her that an instrument tuned in haste was a lie told politely, and Marigold did not tell lies. It was while she was deep inside the middle register, her head bent close to the strings, that she heard the other sound. A small sound, a girl's voice, low and frightened, from the passage behind the screen at the far end of the room, and then a second voice over it, polished and cold, saying something Marigold could not at first make out. She lifted her head. The polished voice came again, clearer now, and what it said was that a thing was missing, and that a girl who had nothing would naturally take what was not hers, and that the matter would be settled here and now, and quietly. Marigold rose from her knees. She came around the end of the great instrument and down the length of the floor, and what she found behind the screen she would carry the rest of her life. The Dowager Duchess stood in her gray morning silk with a small silver vinaigrette in one gloved hand, the very object she claimed had been stolen, recovered now from the floor where it had plainly rolled and lodged against the skirting. And before her, backed into the corner where the wainscot met the cold wall, crouched a girl of the Academy's scullery, a thin creature with reddened hands much like Marigold's own, her cap knocked askew, her arm flung up across her face. The Duchess had taken up a visitor's slender ebony cane from the stand by the door, and she had it raised. There was no time in it for thought. There was only the body moving ahead of the mind, the way the body does at the edge of a fall, and Marigold crossed the last of the distance and struck the descending arm aside with the flat of her open hand. The cane went wide and clattered against the wainscot. The vinaigrette dropped from the Duchess's other glove and rang on the boards. And in the doorway behind them all, drawn by the girl's first cry, stood 3 people who had come in quietly while the room was empty, and who had seen the end of it, though not the beginning. The Academy's gray liveried footman, Lady Petronel Vasse, in her carriage cloak, and the Duke, perfectly still, The footman, who knew on which side his bread was buttered and feared the Duchess more than he feared God, found his voice first. "You struck a Duchess," he said, and the room fell utterly quiet, and the morning's careful work was over, and the long tuning that Marigold had not finished hung half done in the air, like a question nobody would now answer. What happened in the hour after was the kind of thing that the powerful arrange smoothly because they have arranged so many. The Duchess did not rage. That was the first surprise, and the most frightening one. She set her glove to rights, and she had the scullery girl removed by a back stair before the child could be asked a single question, and she turned to the small company in the doorway and told them in a voice as even as a ruled line exactly what they had seen. They had seen a tradeswoman of the town, admitted to the rooms on sufferance, lay violent hands upon a peeress of the realm without provocation. They had seen the silver vinaigrette, which this person had been caught attempting to conceal, and which the Duchess, in recovering it, had been wantonly assaulted to prevent. The girl of the scullery, she added, was a known liar, and had already been turned off, and would not be available to muddy a plain account. It was a complete thing, that account, smooth on every side. And the dreadful part, the part Marigold felt close over her like cold water, was that it could not easily be disproved, because the only witness to the true beginning of it was a frightened child already being carried out a back door by people the Duchess paid. There is a kind of moment worth holding still inside, and this was one. A woman of no rank, and a true thing that had happened to a frightened child, and a powerful woman, with a false account, and every means to make it stick. The whole of what followed turned upon which of those would finally be allowed to weigh the more. Now back to the assembly room, where the candle wax still hung sweet and new on the air. Lady Petronell believed the Duchess at once, because believing the Duchess was the habit of her life, and because the alternative cost her something she did not wish to pay. She drew her cloak closer, and looked at Marigold with the particular distaste of a person who has decided not to look too hard. The footman believed the Duchess because he had been told what he had seen before he had time to decide for himself. The Duke said nothing at all. He had crossed the room while the Duchess spoke. Slowly, and he had bent and picked up the fallen ebony cane, and he had stood turning it in his two hands and looking at it as though it were a word, in a language he was working to read. He had seen from the doorway the cane come down, and the open hand strike it aside. He had not seen what came before. He had seen, though, the scullery girl's face for the half-second before she was taken away, and he had seen the way the tradeswoman put herself between the cane and the child, without any calculation in it, the way a person does a thing that has already been decided, somewhere below the level of choosing. And something in him that had been shut since a cold January had moved, very slightly, like a door tried in the dark. He set the cane back in its stand. He looked at Marigold, and he asked her one question in his short, level voice. "What is your name?" She told him. "Marigold Ash," she said, and her voice did not shake, which surprised her. The Duchess made a small sound, as if a servant had spoken out of turn, and reminded the room that the woman's name was hardly the point, that the magistrate would have it soon enough, and that the assembly was in some hours and the matter must be put away before the guests arrived. She had the rooms to set in order. She had a girl to play and a county to receive. She would not have her rooms made the subject of common talk. And so the smooth machinery moved, and Marigold was put out by the side passage she had come in by, with the magistrate's summons promised to follow her home, and the academy's doors closed behind her on the unfinished instrument and the green smell of wax. She walked back down the high street with her father's leather roll of tools under her arm, and her ears ringing. She was not a woman given to weeping, and she did not weep. She thought instead, with the cold, clear part of her mind, that her father had trained into her over the strings, about evidence and about witnesses and about how a true thing might be made to stand when the only honest mouth had been carried out a back door. The dismissive word found her again that very afternoon, in the second of its three voicings. She had gone, against her own better sense, to the chandler's, where the academy's scullery staff were sometimes lodged above the shop, hoping to find the girl. The chandler's wife met her on the stair, and would not let her up, and said, with her arms folded across her apron, that there was no thieving creature housed under her roof, that the Duchess's own woman had been by an hour since to make sure the town understood it, and that Marigold would do well to remember that a tradeswoman who lays hands on her betters is only a thief of a different kind. The word she used was that one, thief. She said it the way the powerful had taught her to say it, as though it settled the matter, and she shut the door. Marigold stood on the stair a long moment. The girl was gone, spirited off to some farm or workhouse beyond her reach, and with her had gone the beginning of the truth. What remained was the middle and the end, which Marigold had seen, and which a tradeswoman's word could not make way against a duchess's. That night she did the thing she always did when the world pressed too close. She uncovered the small square pianoforte that had been her father's own, the one instrument she would not sell however near the rent ran, and she sat at it, in the dark of her 2 rooms, and she played. She played the half-copied sonata she had been working from a borrowed score, the one with the page that ended mid-phrase, and the notes went out into the small space and made it, for a little while, larger than it was. She did not know whose sonata it had been. She knew only that it was unfinished, and that unfinished things had a hold on her she could not always explain. What she did not know was that the man who could not bear the long room had a copy of that same sonata locked in a drawer at Halverstone House in his sister's hand, ending on the same broken phrase, and that he had not been able to open the drawer in 2 years. The Duke did not go to the magistrate. This was the second surprise, and the Duchess felt it as a small wrongness, a draught from a door she had thought shut. She had expected him to lend his way to her account, as the county's first gentleman, and to be done with the tiresome business. Instead, he sent no word at all. He spent the day at Halverstone with his steward and a great many ledgers, and he asked his steward a question that had nothing to do with rents, which was whether the Academy kept a register of the side door, a book in which trade and deliveries were marked in and out by the hour, as well-kept houses did. His steward said that any house of business kept such a book, and that the Academy's would be in the porter's lodge by the side door. The Duke said nothing more, but a thing had begun in him that he had not permitted himself in 2 years, which was the wish to know the truth of what had happened in a room his sister had died in. The assembly went forward 2 evenings later, as though nothing had occurred. The candles were lit and smelled green. The county came in its silk and its diamonds, and Lady Petronell sat at the great instrument which had been finished by some other hand in a hurry, and which was, to any ear that knew, a half-step from honest. And she played her piece correctly and coolly, and was applauded. The Dowager Duchess sat beneath the windows in her severe steel silk and the rope of frost-colored diamonds, and received the county's deference like a tide coming in. And midway through the evening, when the talk had warmed and the wine had gone round, she let the story out in its third and most public voicing to a half-circle of listening faces. "A tradeswoman," she said lightly, as one shares a small county curiosity. A tuner of pianofortes admitted to do her work in presuming on it, who had been caught with a piece of the Academy's silver in her apron, and who had struck the speaker herself, a duchess, across the wrist when she was discovered. The half-circle made the sound such circles make. The word thief went round on a dozen tongues, easy and final. Lady Petronell, at the Duchess's elbow, said that she had seen it with her own eyes, the violence of it, the woman's raw, red hands, and that one could not be too careful about whom one let into one's rooms. The Duke stood at the edge of that half-circle, and he heard it all, and he set down his glass. He did not make a speech. He had no speech in him, and the niche of the evening had no place for one. He crossed to where Lady Petronell sat, and he asked her quietly, in front of the half-circle, whether she had seen the silver in the woman's apron with her own eyes, as she had just said, or whether she had seen the Duchess hold it up afterward and tell her so. Lady Petronell, who had never in her life been asked to distinguish between the two, opened her mouth, and found that she could not, and the color came up in her face, and the half-circle grew very quiet. The Duchess turned her cool gaze upon him and said that she hoped his Grace was not suggesting that her own word required the corroboration of a tuner's. And the Duke said levelly that he was suggesting nothing, only that he found he wished to be sure, and that he had always been a man who liked to be sure. It was not a defense of Marigold. He did not name her. Even so, it was the first crack in the smooth account, made in public, in the very room where the verdict had been rendered, and the Duchess heard it for what it was. She was not a stupid woman. She understood at that moment, with a cold clarity that had carried her through 40 years, of rooms like this one, that the Duke had become a danger, and that a danger must be managed before it grew. So she did what such a woman does. She moved to make the account unbreakable. The next morning, the Duchess's own man of business called upon the Academy's porter, the keeper of the side door, an old man named Dabbings, who had held the lodge through 3 changes of owner and wished to hold it through a 4th. He was given to understand, without anything so vulgar as a threat, that the register of the side door for the morning in question was a document of some delicacy that it would be a great pity if it were found to contain errors, and that a porter who valued his place would see that the book told the simple story the Duchess had already told. Old Dabbings, who had a wife and a settled fear of the cold, took the new leaf that was offered him and copied the morning's entries fair, leaving out one line, the line that recorded the scullery girl carried out by the back stair an hour before any hour at which a theft could decently have been discovered, and adding nothing the Duchess did not wish added. He told himself it was a small thing. He told himself the book was only paper. The Duchess thought herself safe then. She had a witness in Lady Petronelle, a porter's book that agreed with her, a child carried beyond anyone's reach, and the whole weight of her rank pressing the account flat. She did not reckon on 2 things. She did not reckon on the Duke's quiet wish to be sure, which had become, without his quite admitting it, a wish to be near the woman who had moved him. And she did not reckon on Marigold Ash's hands, for the Duke had done a thing that no one had thought to do. He had sent his steward to find the tuner. She came to Halverstone House on a grey afternoon, summoned by a note in a hand she did not know, certain she was being called to be threatened or paid off, and resolved to refuse whichever it proved to be. She was shown not to a parlor but to a long, cold music-room at the back of the house, shuttered and dust-sheeted, where a single great pianoforte stood uncovered in the center of the floor, and where the Duke waited beside it, alone, without his steward, which was itself a kind of impropriety that told her more than his words did. He did not offer her money. That was the 3rd surprise of that strange week, and the one that undid her guard. He told her, in his short level voice, that the instrument before her had not been played in 2 years, that it had belonged to his sister, and that he wished to know whether it could be made to sound again. He said it plainly. As a man states a fact, he has decided to stop hiding. Marigold looked at the great dark instrument, and then at the man beside it, and she understood, with the ear she used for everything, that he was not asking about the pianoforte at all, or not only. She set down her leather roll and she opened the lid and she began. For the better part of an hour she did not speak, and neither did he, and the room filled note by note the way the Academy's long room had filled, except that here there was no one to put her out at the end of it. She found the soundboard cracked, but sound, the wires gone slack and false. The regulation collapsed, and under her hands the dead thing slowly came back toward life, the beats slowing and vanishing, the unisons drawing true. And when she had brought it as far as one afternoon would allow, she did the thing she could not help doing. She sat down at it, and she played the half-copied sonata, the one that ended on the broken phrase, because it was the piece her hands knew best, and because the instrument seemed to want it. The Duke stood very still by the shuttered window, and his carved jaw did not move. And the only sign of what was happening in him was that he had put one hand flat against the wall, as though the house had tilted. For the sonata she played was his sister's. It was the very piece that lay in the locked drawer in Roderica's hand, ending on the same phrase, in the same place, because his sister had died before she could finish it, and no one living had ever heard past where the page broke off. When Marigold lifted her hands and the last false ending hung in the air, the Duke crossed the room. He did not touch her. He stood close, closer than rank allowed, and he asked her, his voice low where she had learned that piece. She told him she had copied it from a borrowed score and never learned whose it was, and that it troubled her because it stopped unfinished, and that she had spent 3 years wishing she might know how it was meant to end. And the Duke was quiet a long moment, and then he said in 4 words that cost him everything they did not say, that it had been his sister's. That was the midpoint of it, the still center, and from it the story could have turned either way. It turned, as such things do, on the smaller and more ordinary fact that the Duchess had not stopped working while the Duke went still in a music room. Ward had reached her by her own channels that the tuner had been seen entering Halverstone House and had not been seen leaving for above 2 hours. And the Duchess, who understood the world, drew the correct conclusion from it and was not pleased. A tradeswoman she could ruin at leisure, a tradeswoman the county's first gentleman had taken an interest in, was a different and a faster problem. The magistrate's summons, which had been hanging unserved while she enjoyed the slow pleasure of it, she now caused to be served at once, and she let it be known, in the half-circle and beyond, that the matter would be tried at the next quarter sessions, and that she herself, a peeress wronged, would appear to give her account, and that the county might judge for itself the worth of a tuner's hands against a duchess's word. She meant it to be the end. She made it, instead, the arena. What saved Marigold Ash in the end was not the Duke, and was not luck, and was not the late arrival of a kind coincidence. What saved her was a thing she had been building, unseen, every morning of her working life, which was a reputation among the small, honest people of the town for telling no lies, not even polite ones, with her hands or her mouth. That reputation was about to be asked to carry a great deal. In the days before the sessions, the Duke did not sit idle, but neither did he do the thing a lesser man might have done, which was to throw his rank into the scale and crush the Duchess's account by main force. He had learned, in 2 years of grief, the difference between a verdict imposed and a truth uncovered, and he wanted the second for Marigold's sake, and would not insult her with the first. So he went quietly to old Dabbings at the porter's lodge, not as a duke leaning on a servant, but as a man asking another man to remember his own honor, and he asked to see the register of the side door for the morning in question. Dabbings brought out the fair-copied book, with its missing line and its smooth false story, and his old hands shook as he did it, and the Duke saw the shaking, and did not need to be told what it meant. He did not bully the old man. He asked him one question. He asked whether Dabbings would be able to sleep in the cold he so feared, knowing that a young woman who had never done him a wrong had been transported beyond the sea on the strength of a line he had left out of a book. And he left the question with him, and he left. That was the active thing, and the Duchess had an answer to it, because she always had an answer. When word reached her that the Duke had been at the porter's lodge, she sent her man of business back to Dabbings the same evening, with a purse and a fresh reminder of the cold, and she thought the book secured a second time. She had not allowed for the truth that a man asked to weigh his honor against his comfort, once the question has been honestly put, can rarely go back to sleeping as he did before. Dabbings kept the purse. He also kept, folded inside his own waistcoat, against his heart, the spoiled original leaf with the true entries on it, the one he had been told to burn, and had not been able to burn because some part of him had always known the day might come when it was the only honest thing left in the house. The quarter sessions were held in the assembly room of the Marbury Town Hall, which was very nearly as fine as the Academy's long room, and held very nearly the same faces. And into that crowded place the Dowager Duchess came in grey silk and frost-colored diamonds to give her account. And Marigold Ash came in, her plain best gown, with her father's leather roll of tools left at home, because she had decided that whatever happened, she would stand as herself and not as a supplicant. The Duchess gave her account, and it was as smooth as it had ever been. The vinaigrette held up, the violence done to her wrist described. Lady Petronell called to confirm what she had seen, and Lady Petronell rose, and the room waited. And Lady Petronell, who had been asked once already in public to distinguish between what she had seen and what she had been told, and who had spent 2 sleepless nights since unable to stop hearing the Duke's quiet question, found that when the moment came to swear an oath, she could not make her mouth shape the false thing. She said in a small, clear voice that carried that she had seen the tuner strike the Duchess's arm. That was true, and she said it. And then she said the other true thing, the one the Duchess had not foreseen, which was that she had not seen the silver in any apron, that she had seen the Duchess hold it up afterward, and that she had seen, in the half-second before the child was taken out, the cane raised over a girl in the corner. She said she was sorry. She said it to Marigold across the crowded room, and her correct, cool face was not cool at all. The Duchess did not fragment then. She was made of harder material. She turned the loss of her witness, with the ease of long practice, said that a young woman's nerves were unreliable, that the porter's own register would show the morning's truth, and she called for the book. And old Dabbings was brought forward with the fair-copied book in his hands. And the Duchess looked at him with the full, cold weight of 40 years of rooms, and waited for him to read out the smooth, false story she had bought twice. Dabbings opened the fair book. His hands shook. He looked at the smooth, false line he had copied, and he looked at the young woman standing plain and straight across the room, and he thought of the cold, and then he did the thing the Duke had left him the room to do. He drew from inside his waistcoat the spoiled original leaf he had not been able to burn, and he laid it on the table beside the fair copy, and he said in a cracked old voice that this was the true book, and that the other was a lie he had been paid to write, and that the true book showed the scullery girl carried out the back stair a full hour before any theft was cried, which no honest account of a theft could explain. The room did not erupt. It went still and silent the way the candlelit assembly room had done weeks before, except that now the silence fell on the other side of the scale. The Duchess looked at the 2 leaves on the table, the false and the true, and for the first time in the memory of anyone present, a small movement disturbed the still surface of her face. She did not weep, and she did not rail. She said after a moment that the porter was a thief and a liar, and that his book proved nothing, and the words came out a half-beat too fast, and the room heard the half-beat. She said that her own word, the word of a peeress, surely stood against the scribbling of a lodge-keeper, and the sentence broke a little in the middle, and the room heard that too. The confident account that had carried all before it began, in front of the whole county, to come apart at the joints, not because anyone shouted it down, but because the truth had at last been laid beside it, and the difference could be seen. It was then, and only then, in the same arena where the first verdict had been rendered against her, that the Duke of Halverstone crossed the room. He crossed it slowly, in the deliberate way he did everything, and the county watched him come. And he did not stop until he stood at Marigold's side close, where everyone could see whose side it was. He turned to face the room, and he said the thing he had come to say, short and specific and irrevocable, the calibrated weight of it landing in the silence the crossing had made. I will not let Miss Ashe stand alone. That was all. He did not denounce the Duchess. He did not match her cruelty with cruelty, or call for her ruin. He laid no charge, and demanded no punishment. He named the one thing he had decided, which was that the woman beside him would not face the room without him. And then he said one thing more, quieter, for the room and for the magistrates, which was that he had restored to honest order the very instrument the Academy claimed she had assaulted them to rob, that he had heard her play upon it, a piece that no thief and no liar could have played, and that he staked his own name, which the county valued, upon the worth of her hands and her word. He did not say that she had played his sister's unfinished sonata, that he kept. The rooms had taken his sister from him once, and he had not spoken then, and he was not going to fail to speak a second time. The magistrates, who were country gentlemen and not fools, and who had now before them a recanting witness, a porter's true book against a porter's false one, and the staked word of the county's first gentleman found that the case against Marigold Ash could not stand, and they said so. And they let her go free. The Dowager Duchess of Stilmere was not destroyed that day, because this is not a story in which the proud are broken on a wheel. For the comfort of the watching, the county that had received her like a tide that morning drew back from her by inches through the long afternoon. And she felt every inch of it, and she understood that her account had failed, not for want of power, but because a true thing had been allowed at last to stand beside it. Before she left the hall, she did a thing no one expected, which was to look directly at Marigold across the emptying room for a long moment, with something in her cold face that was not quite apology and was not quite anything the language had a clean word for, the look of a person whose script has worked in every room of her life except this one, and who has just understood that the room she was raised inside is not, after all, the whole of the world. Then she gathered her gray silk and her frost-colored diamonds, and she went out, displaced and diminished, and not annihilated, which is the only humbling this kind of story permits. No ending is clean that leaves a child carried out a back stair to be forgotten. And the scullery girl had not been forgotten. The Duke had not forgotten her. He had set his steward to find her in the same hour. He set him to find the tuner, and she was discovered at a hard farm 2 parishes off, and she was brought back, and a place was made for her in the kitchens at Halverstone, where no cane would ever again be raised over her reddened hands. She is safe, and so I will say no more of her, because the safe deserve their privacy, as much as the wronged deserve their justice. The Duke and Marigold did not fall into one another's arms in the town hall, because they were neither of them that sort, and because the niche of their feeling was restraint and not display. The courtship that followed was slow and quiet, and conducted very largely over an instrument. He brought her in, the weeks after, the locked drawer's contents, his sister's hand, the true ending of the sonata that Marigold had carried unfinished in her own for 3 years, and together at the great pianoforte in the unshuttered music room they played it through to its close, the broken phrase mended at last. The two halves of the same grief, joined into one whole and resolving thing. There is a particular silence that comes after a long unfinished piece is finally finished, and they sat in it together, and that silence said what neither of them yet had words for. He used her given name for the first time on a golden afternoon on the grounds at Halverstone, with the autumn light coming low across the grass and the gray stone of the house behind them. Marigold, he said. Only that. And the saying of it was a kind of vow, and she heard it as one. She did not pretend she had not. She had spent her life telling no lies with her hands or her mouth, and she was not going to begin by lying about the things she felt. They were married before the year was out, quietly, in the small church at the edge of the Halverstone grounds, with the scullery girl safe in a new pinafore among the few who watched, and old Dabbing standing near the door in a coat the Duke had given him, his honor and his place both kept after all, which was more than he had dared to hope on the cold morning. He could not burn a spoiled leaf. The county came, because the county always comes, and it had, by then, thoroughly revised its account of the cold Duke and the tuner's daughter, in the way the crowd in this kind of story is always finally shown to revise it, its first verdict overturned by the slow plain weight of the truth. If her story moved you, stay a moment in it before you go, and remember that the room that first went silent against her went silent for her in the end, and that the difference was made not by rank and not by chance, but by a pair of honest hands that had never once been asked to be more than useful. On a winter evening that first married year, when the snow had come down soft and steady over the Halverstone grounds, and the candles in the music room smelled green the way candles do when they are newly lit, Marigold uncovered the great pianoforte that had once stood shuttered and dead, and she sat down at it, and she did not play the unfinished sonata, because it was finished now and needed no more from her. She played something new instead, a small thing of her own, a few measures she had been carrying in her head. The Duke came and stood beside her, with one hand flat on the instrument's dark case, not on the wall this time, because the house no longer tilted under him, and the snow went on falling past the tall windows in the warm gold light, and the room that had taken so much from him gave a little of it back, note by note. the way an honest instrument does when an honest hand has set it true. She finished the small new piece, and she did not lift her hands at once, but let the last of it hang and fade into the quiet. And into that quiet, soft as the snow, she began the next thing, and there was no broken phrase in it anywhere, and no one in all the warm, bright room would ever again be put out by the side door when the candles were lit.